All right, hello everyone. So we're just gonna spend a couple minutes wrapping up these last two topics that go with our very first set of hypothesis tests. So remember, we've been talking about doing a hypothesis test when we just have a single categorical variable of interest. Not only that, but our single categorical variable of interest has to have two categories for the tests we've been doing. So either like you got the question right or you got it wrong. Has been our example in this note packet, and then we've had a couple other examples in our handouts. So this last kind of issue comes up in any hypothesis test, this issue of statistical significance versus practical significance. We mentioned before when we're writing our conclusions that we're always going to include our point estimate, in this case our sample proportion. And part of the reason we're doing that is for this kind of issue of statistical versus practical significance. To illustrate what this is, let's go ahead and talk about it through an example. And so we're going to suppose that I find through a large experiment that let's say that reading the stats course textbook improves test scores. We'll say that through this study, my p-value is really small, 0.001, indicating that there's a lot of evidence, or convincing evidence, that reading the stats course textbook improves test scores. We're also going to suppose that I actually did everything right in this experiment. So I randomly assigned students to read the textbook and not. Somehow that was ethically okay. I got a random sample of students to be in my study, all that good stuff. But we're going to also suppose that even though my p-value is so small, that my estimate for the amount of improvement is 0.1% on average. So on average, students who read the textbook score 0.1% higher on an exam than students who don't. There's really, really strong evidence that students who read the textbook do better than students who do not. What this example illustrates is that this is statistically significant. Statistically significant are words that just usually are used to describe meaning that our p-value is very small. But this is not practically significant, meaning that most people would not care about such a tiny improvement. So who cares about that tiny average improvement? The most common situation where this occurs is if you have a really large sample size here, because your large sample size is going to allow you to detect that there's a difference between the two groups and that there's strong evidence for that difference, even if that difference isn't very big, in this case just 0.1%. All right, so the last little set of 3 paragraphs here we won't really talk about, but just know that one-sided hypothesis tests, all that means is that the alternative would be like your proportion is bigger than a third or your proportion is less than a third, so it would just be one of these two things. And they're becoming less and less common, so we're not really going to talk about them. It's rare that you would do this in practice, but we're just mentioning them in case you see them in something that you're reading. All right, as always, definitely let me know if you have any questions. In the coming week we'll kind of talk about a few different types of hypothesis tests, but it'll be really nice because we'll use the same framework that we've done for our categorical variable with two categories.